Hello and welcome everybody to the Essential Libertarians. I'm your host, Kareem Mays, giving you the tools for self-governance, and we have an amazing guest today. He has really been helpful in the liberty movement. He also has some insight on different things going on in the military, NATO, the Pentagon, stuff that's really, really important in my opinion, current events. So everybody, welcome Erik Raudsep, awesome guy, and he has amazing background. What's up, Erik?
Hey, how's everyone doing today?
Awesome. I'm doing awesome. I'm super glad you're here. Thank you for taking the time. I appreciate everything you've done from, helping Angela with all these different things and being a really strong voice in the liberty movement. And I'm super excited for this. I also have my co-host, Daniel Beatro. What is up, Daniel?
Nothing much. Just staying on that carnivore diet, as always. I made a new YouTube channel mainly about health and fitness and stuff like that. So I'll be uploading videos on that channel. I'll talk about veganism because it has some positive aspects.
Yeah,
of course.
For cows. Yeah. They eat the grass. I'm a secondary vegan. I let the cows eat the grass and I eat them. All right. So the big question, we were talking at convention.
Yes.
And a lot of people I've talked to on the right are coming closer to the idea. Like I've talked to some people who are like maybe in the MAGA movement or stuff like that. And I brought up, okay, let's end the drug war, things like that. And eventually I can get them to, hey, let's defund the Pentagon. Yeah. But there's a lot of people, when you say that, they think like, oh, you want to defund the Pentagon, we won't have any defense. Just like, oh, if you get rid of the NIH or the CDC, there'll be no health care, police, no. But you actually have experience in that. I don't. And when I said defund it, you're like, yeah. And when I was talking about NATO, you had some insights on that. So just to let people know who would be watching this, because I'm definitely going to be sharing this out, that and a lot of the different candidates I'm talking to. What do you think about defunding the Pentagon, the whole thing, just getting rid of the whole thing, not like 75%, not 80%, the whole thing, and going to a more like militia defense like the founders kind of wanted to do?
So, I mean, it's definitely a viable option. It's something that can be done in the United States. Basically, what you're going to be doing is returning to almost a Civil War era military where the states are funding it or local municipalities are funding it or private individuals. Because actually during the Civil War, there were quite a few privately fielded units within the Union and within the Confederacy. So, I mean, it's not that it hasn't happened before. It would be a dramatic shift. It would be a learning curve. But it's not like the military hardware is going anywhere. The technology exists. It is for sale. And there's a surplus of material out there right now. And it can be very easily done. It's definitely something that's viable. It's kind of one of those situations where there's a learning curve, and how are you going to achieve all of those goals? That kind of comes into the difficulty. Making sure everyone's on the same page, because ultimately we still have a nation to defend or a conglomeration of states to defend. So therefore, you still need to have some sort of cohesion between the units and communication and a structure, as it were. But having a federal military is actually something that really came out post-Civil War because of everything that occurred in there. So for many, many years, 7 years ago, just like Lincoln said, so 87 years, the United States had a military that was state-based and not nationally-based. So it's definitely something that can be done.
Yeah, no, that's one thing I was really interested to hear, because a lot of people, I can get some people on that page, but a lot of people freak out. They're like, oh, there'll be no defense. China, all of a sudden, like, I feel like people think like China has nothing to do than just like look at, not to say they're not involved, they are, the CCP's involved, but like they have nothing to do than just like, oh, okay, the United States has gone back to state defense, let's attack. That's kind of how I guess a lot of these people still have kind of like this old neocon type view. That's good that you're talking about that. How would you, and I'm actually kind of curious, if we were to say like, okay, we're going to have Pennsylvania have its own militia.
Mhm.
We're going to have, let's say different militias in there, maybe militias for each county or something like that. And then New York have its own militia, Colorado have its own militia, Nevada have its own militia. Would you keep all the like bases there still and air bases and then just have maybe like, I guess you could call it a council or something, or like kind of what private institution would you put in place to create synergy between the states so we could still function in a decentralized fashion without having to go back to this centralized crazy structure?
Well, military bases as they exist today are exceptionally expensive to maintain and to operate. If we were to go back to a state-based military system, I really see that most of our military bases around the country would probably be closed. It's not economically viable for a lot of states or local municipalities to run and operate these facilities. It's just not. You'll probably see a lot of the air bases become hybrid, where you'll have civilian aircraft and military aircraft operating out of the same airport. You'll see a lot of military bases become multifunctional if they exist or they continue to exist in the features that they have currently. Areas where you probably would not see much of a change is probably going to be naval bases, military missile structures. So our ICBM fleet, those facilities are very small. They're very manageable, and states or local municipalities could maintain them quite easily.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what I would like to do is like get it at least more decentralized so that in the case of, let's say, the Iraq thing happens or something happens, and then one state's like, we're going to invade this country, even Russia. And then the other states, 48 of them say, no, you two states on your own. I think that would be a strong incentive for them to say, well, let's kind of rethink what we're doing, as opposed to one central institution says, this is what we're doing. All 50 states, you're on board. There is no question.
Right.
And we're going to go to Middle Eastern country or this Eastern European country and cause problems, which I think that's actually the issue. I think it'll actually make us safer. It'd save money.
Well, especially in the way we wage war today, no longer does Congress authorize war. It's done with executive orders. So the only person that really has deployment power is going to be the president, which is not the way that it was originally structured. It wasn't ever intended to be that way, but that's kind of how it's devolved over time. And that's problematic. And I think going back to a structure where it's state-based or local municipality-based, fielding the military, that will take that power away from the president and restore it back to Congress, because now there's more of a state investment in the military.
If there is no Congress, do you think we could still do it? Like, let's say Whiskey Hotel is gone. It just a bunch of buildings, which to me, that's I'm not even trying to get to ANCAP, Stan. I'm just saying, look, right now, even though I am an ANCAP, I'm just saying, look, the White House is a Leviathan.
Yes.
Trying to reform it's not going to work. Your controlled opposition wave, red wave, is going to put more people in there who might have some good ideas, but over time, the ring's going to corrupt them. And I just don't see it being worth the time to try and maintain this huge institution because it just keeps growing. I think we'd put the brakes on it. That being said, I think there's still ways to facilitate national defense, and it doesn't have to just be private companies. I think it can be both. And that's not to say private companies are perfect either. They're they're still humans, right?
Oh yeah.
So
yeah.
Well, I mean, we've had a lot of trial and error with private prisons, for example. And I think there would be a very long and bitter trial and error period, especially if we fully privatize the military right off the bat. I think it would probably be more of a progression. First is going to be moving it entirely to the states and local municipalities, and then eventually allowing corporations to join in and field units. And maybe sometime in the future, it can be completely privately owned. but that would be much more difficult than having states and local municipalities be running the government, because in essence the military provides nothing. Therefore, there's really very little for corporate investment to occur, other than they're the end user in a lot of products, and they don't create a product. Therefore, it's very difficult for them, for corporations to really invest in military units themselves, unless if we can somehow incentivize it. It would be much more difficult.
Well, one of the things that I would say is that, a lot of people on the left and sometimes people on the right ask, like, if you get rid of, let's say, the Department of Education or the military, like, what's going to take its place? Something has to take its place. And I don't know exactly the process by which we do that with no consequences, negative consequences, and whatnot. But I do know that we spend $778 billion on the military. That's almost $1 trillion. We spend around $255 million on the Department of Education. So if we did abolish those institutions, abolish the military, it doesn't have to necessarily be private automatically. Like you said, it could be a progressive process, just bringing the military action further and further back to the individual and take it away from the state, because that's really what it should be. That's what it was, in 1776, right? At the bottom of it all was the individual, and then the individual voluntarily formed groups and formed militias, and there would be multiple militias throughout the United States. But you could take that $778 billion and put that money into a private version of the military, or any other version, or give that to individuals, right? Give that to buy guns, and give those guns to all individuals who obviously aren't like pedophiles, violent criminals, and whatnot. And same thing with the Department of Education, like $255 billion on that. That will build thousands of schools, right? If you put that into the private sector, and schools are a lot less complicated, because we already have private schools, and they are more, not only are they more effective than public schools, but the grades on average, COVID affected the grades in public school. Like, the grades went down about 1.5, right? Private schools, they didn't go up, but they stayed the same. They flatlined, and that's better than going down. So we already know the mechanism by which that works. If all we have to do is really move the money from the government, the state apparatus, and give it to the people in the private hands, and there will be tons of private schools and competition at that, which will lower prices, in my opinion.
Oh, definitely. I totally agree. I mean, people who argue about the necessity of, or what would we do without a Department of Education, we don't even need to look back 140 years.
That's true. Yeah.
We only have to go back to 1977. So, I mean, there's plenty of people that are alive that were educated without the Department of Education. So, I mean,
when they had gun safety classes at that, for a long time, they had gun safety classes.
Right. My high school that I went to, we had a gun range in the basement. Nice. I mean, we didn't use it by the time I was in high school, but it was there. And this was in New York. This is on Long Island, New York. And we had a gun range in our school.
Nice. Yeah. Because to me, when I read the Second Amendment, what I actually take from it is two things. One, to get the left mad, which is shall not be infringed. But it says a well-regulated militia. And when I say, like, the military in the way it's being run is unconstitutional, I'm not even talking about, anarchist perspective. I'm just saying from a classical liberal standpoint, we shouldn't have this overwhelmed military. Founding fathers worried about standing armies, and they worried about entangling alliances as well.
Correct.
So that's one thing I really kind of wanted to bring to light, and with your expertise, it's really good to get some different ideas out there.
Oh geez. Hold on with me for just a second, and I will change out the battery.
Change out the battery.
Yeah, look at that.
Well, Kareem, one of the things I was going to say is that, so I don't think it's going to be that difficult to tell the people in the military, I'm talking Army and Marines, that, hey, You're no longer a state government. You can still hold a weapon. You can still guard whatever perimeters. There'll still be bases, right? In America, I'm not talking about the foreign bases. They'll be like, okay, mainly because most of the military people lean conservative. But what I am worried about, my biggest fear, is how we can roll back these agencies, these alphabet agencies, these intelligent agencies, because like you said in that amendment, right, the Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia. And I think by our founding fathers, standards, the CIA is not regulated. It does whatever it wants. And not only does it do whatever it wants in the United States, it does whatever it wants globally. It's a global intelligence agency that spies on people around the world. It has gone way past, I think, in my opinion, the standards of a well-regulated militia. And the question is, if we are going to roll back some parts of the government and do it incrementally, because I think that's the safest, least damaging way to do it. If we're going to do that, how do we get these intelligence agencies, which have enormous power and in a large amount of enforcement and weapons behind that enforcement, how do we get them to just say, okay, you're no longer going to be the CIA, or you can't go into other countries? Like, they have a lot of tools, and I'm not just talking about like guns. I'm talking about like psychological tools. They have so much data and intelligence on the American people. It just I don't know what the answer to that question is. How do we roll back those intelligence agencies? I mean, we've seen what they've done to ex-presidents when they try and go after them.
You just kind of hit the hardest part. Those intelligence agencies they have most of Washington. They have a lot of corporations. They have a lot of Americans by the cojones, and undoing that is going to be probably one of the most difficult parts of moving towards a private military, or to a localized military.
Yeah,
that's going to be the hardest part. Having those people give up that type of control, is going to be. Basically, there's a lot of Washington has sold their soul to the intelligence community.
Much of it
is really what it is.
That's what. Yeah, I've said, like, to me, the three branches of government are special interests, bureaucrats, and intelligence agencies. Forget the executive and legislature.
And here's the thing about intelligence agencies. My uncle, for those of you who don't know, was the director of the NCIS for a long time, right? And you see this with Snowden, you see this with a lot of those guys who are in government, right? I love my uncle. I haven't met him that many times, but he's worked in government his entire life, rise to the most elite levels, the upper echelons of government. And once he was the NCIS director for a good amount of time, he sort of rolled back in his position. And he was also someone who guarded Reagan and guarded George Herschel Walker Bush, the first Bush, when he went to trips and whatnot. But anyways, after he left that sort of position, he still stayed in government, but he stayed in government and in cyber intelligence, counterintelligence was his specialty, in a private sort of domain, right? He was working at home. He sort of retired in a lot of ways. He wasn't in the same spotlight, but he was still working for the United States government. And to this day, he's still working for the counterintelligence agency. He's just doing it in a smaller capacity. But the intelligence agency isn't just the governmental agency, right? It's the non-governmental agencies. It's all these corporations which also work with these governmental agencies that are doing stuff in the private sector and in the government. And it's not very clear where the line ends and begins because, like I said, I'm not throwing shade at my uncle, but the point is, if you're a CIA agent, you're pretty much always a CIA agent, even when you're retired. If you work in intelligence, you never really get out of this. Every guy I saw, even Snowden, look at Snowden, right? When he wanted to leave, he was getting really sick and tired of what was going on. So then he started to work in a smaller apparatus with the CIA and the NSA and whatnot. But then even him, once he tried to retire, he couldn't retire. They just kept saying, oh, 400,000, 300,000. And they just wouldn't, they don't let you go because they offer you tons of money and all their different ways of keeping you in even after your retirement and whatnot. So that's one thing I think people forget is how connected the intelligence agency is with the sort of private intelligence sort of arms dealers and all that corporate stuff and whatnot.
Well, also, I mean, a lot of intelligence individuals, they go into General Motors, they go to Ford, they go to the pharmaceutical companies.
That's true.
Because a lot of your intelligence individuals that leave the field from the military side or from the CIA, the FBI, NSA, whatever alphabet soup you wish to throw at it. The corporations in America are looking to hire them because their skill set is very necessary for corporate espionage.
That's true.
I mean, that's a very large avenue that a lot of my friends have taken.
And one of the things I do want to say real quick, what was it? Was with the CIA. Okay, so one of the things that I realized, like listening to multiple CIA agents, right? There's this guy Mike Baker who goes on Rogan here and there, right? I don't trust him. There's this other guy, I can never say his name right, but he's been on Lex Friedman. He's been on a bunch of podcasts recently, and one of the things that he said is that, and Mike Baker as well, is that the CIA is looking for a particular type of individual. It's not necessarily a smart individual. It's not necessarily a weak individual. It's someone who is eager to learn and work, but isn't quite smart enough to disobey orders, is obedient to some degree, but also able to manipulate and be manipulated by the CIA. So they're really looking for people who they can control, but who have some smarts and wits about them. And I wonder, let's just say we roll back to state, right, in some apparatus. I wonder if the CIA would even put up a fight, because I guarantee much of those individuals probably don't like what they're doing, but they've been co-opted and they've been blackmailed, in my opinion. They've basically been, say, they'll throw you in Epstein's Island, or they'll put you in some situation where you're compromised. And then they're like, if you try and leave this agency, if you try and whistleblow, we're going to release these and whatnot. I wonder what percentage of the intelligence agency has really just been compromised.
So actually, the funny thing is, you're absolutely correct. If we moved the military off to the state level, you wouldn't get really much of a fight from the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, because they'd be looking to fill the power vacuum of military intelligence. So they actually see it as a potential power grab for themselves. Where you're really going to achieve a lot of opposition is from the military intelligence community, from corporations like Raytheon, and stuff like that. That's really where you're going to be getting a lot.
That's a good point, because how can those private companies exist if they no longer have government to go to, right? Because they're largely funded by government, right? Yeah. So that's a good point. Like, the government can just go to the private sector, right? There's tons of private intelligence companies, right? Trump worked with a bunch of them. So those CIA agents, they have tons of jobs they go to, but those private companies who have very much relied heavily on the state and the government to function, I mean, those are the ones we probably should be more worried about, now that I think of it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially all of your military industrial complex, because they work very closely with the military intelligence community to make sure that they're put front and center when it comes to budgeting, when it comes to strategic need, and a lot of other reports are very, very dependent on military intelligence and what they're putting out for the next generation of weapons. So they're really very invested in making sure that military intelligence is very friendly and very accommodating to what they have to say.
Interesting. Well, to me, I think we better get rid of them sooner rather than later, because they're the driving force, in my opinion, of creating the current problems we're in. Which, if I can shift gears a little bit to, we talked a little, and you had some pretty good knowledge on NATO, which I call the North Atlantic Terrorist Organization, I think for good reason. Even before Russia, I could argue, look, you turned Libya literally into a Stone Age country. Oh, yeah. You destroy, I mean, they bombed Serbia, things like that. We weren't even involved. But now I think that what they're doing is even more dangerous than everything else. Not to say those other things are, but you said like NATO was the worst, like with just spending money, doing dumb things. And I don't really get their motivation here. Like, even if you want to kind of saber rattle with Russia or do this thing or whatever they want to do, my big question is, how does it benefit anybody to even if nothing happens? This is a pretty bad situation where there's potential use of nukes. I'm not going to say there isn't. I will say Scott Horton is right, but hotter than the sun. But that's even besides the point. Why is NATO doing it just doesn't. There seems to be no logical sense to me on what they're doing. Are they trying to play chicken, or are they being pushed by global interests to say, look, we were almost at a nuclear war, so let's lock down and do a one world government. Maybe I'm good.
I mean, let's be honest. I mean, if it wasn't for Putin's actions right now, NATO was probably about 5-6 years away from being dissolved anyway. I mean, there were serious discussions in France and in Germany, even in the United Kingdom. There were people thinking about leaving NATO prior to Vladimir Putin pulling his antics in the Ukraine. And this has now given a new viability to NATO. I am not a NATO supporter in any way, shape, or form. I do believe that there should be a treaty between these organizations, these nations, the member nations, but it should be much more economically based, with a potential of having some sort of military aspect to it. This is exactly what George Washington was warning us with entangling alliances from the very beginning.
Yep.
And this is the culmination of it. Here's a single reason existence organization for the Cold War, which has completely gone off the rails and is now in its own entity, and it has its own creation. So it's a very dangerous organization. And right now, I mean, if you look at the rhetoric coming out of Russia, it's a large driving force of what's fueling the fire in Russia right now.
Correct.
So
Correct.
It's making it worse. It's not helping the member nations. And I mean, the United Nations, take it for what you will, but the United Nations revised the likelihood that Putin will be using nuclear weapons from 5 to 20% this morning. So it's and a large part of that is because now Sweden and Finland are in NATO. NATO's expanding for the first time since the fall of the Berlin Wall, in essence, or since the fall of the Soviet Union. So you're in a bad situation, and they're not realizing how bad it can be.
Yeah, no, I understand. It can be very bad, but NATO was designed to be a counterforce to the USSR, which I guess you could argue there were multiple state, even though they were probably small countries that didn't have, like, I don't see a huge force coming out of Turkmenistan. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Uzbekistan, maybe like Borat's, in the Kazakhstani army, and he's dangerous. But if I'm keeping it real, like, yeah, Russia's the main driving force to me in the USSR. America's mostly NATO because we're paying for but the way I see it is, yeah, USSR is gone. Has been gone for a long, long time. It's over. That's when NATO should have dissolved, but they kept, jumping up. And I'm not a fan of Putin in any way. Still say he's authoritarian.
Come on, you don't need to lie, Kareem. We know you're a Putin lover. Come on. You said that there shouldn't be nuclear war and that we should make peace. So therefore you love Putin.
Yeah.
By Zelensky's standards, you love Putin if you think that there shouldn't be nuclear war and that we should take steps to probably avoid that, because that's probably not a good idea.
I need to sign on to my Babylon Bee $5 billion a month in aid that we don't have, that we're printing out enough.
I know they're getting money like every week.
Well, Mississippi,
crazy.
Florida has hurricanes, it destroys everything. Mississippi, you can't drink the water. Flint, Michigan. But yeah, here's a bunch to this country, that country. Hey, Israel, what do you want? Taiwan will give you anything you want. Oh, hey, American citizens need help. Like, man, I'm sorry, dude. Like, what do you want? That's one thing, but.
And there's been a lot of rhetoric about, withdrawing NATO from NATO, even here in the United States. But a lot of it is.
Yeah, I shared that link, by the way, about Trump was planning to withdraw. And then, of course, as usual, a bunch of people got in his ear and was like, oh, I don't know. Like, that was always the case. Like, he was going to do something good. And
but a large part of the reason that he wanted to withdraw from NATO was because other member states didn't have a high enough percentage.
Yes, that was also
and he felt like the United States was footing most of the bill. and he would stay in NATO if people increase their military budgets.
Yeah, that's why I didn't really care for what he said, because he's like,
Yeah.
NATO's bad. I'm like, okay. But he's like, they're not paying us. I'm like, what about Libya? What about this? Like, okay, forget. I would honestly say, look, even if they did pay us, even if France tomorrow gave me 10 billion in Bitcoin, I'd be like, that's great. We're still leaving.
Yeah.
Because you guys are pushing this to a level where we had some discussion. I had some discussion with a friend. I don't know. You probably have more insight. My friend Harrison, he is in the military as well. He said he doesn't think Ukraine will get into NATO. But when I saw that, I'm like, that's still kind of scary that Ukraine's even trying to get into NATO, because some countries may say yes, some countries may say no. And look, I don't like anything really about Putin. I can't even get along with Randians and minarchists. I'm always trying to be like, hey, look, here's why anarchy is a better model. And it's so that kind of kicks it off the table. But
I agree with you that Ukraine will never become a full member of NATO, but they will probably achieve what NATO calls protective nation status. So they'll basically.
Is that still covered by Article 5? Or is that?
It can be. That's the tricky part. When you're a protected nation status, you have limited Article 5 protections. And that's where it gets a little gray, it gets a little murky, and it gets very scary.
Yeah, that sounds, I didn't know that could be a thing where, that is scary, because, I mean, at the end of the day, whether Ukraine's right, Russia's right, we all know, at least we all assume based off of the information we've been given, that Russia invaded Ukraine. I think everyone in this live stream agrees that, it was a violation of the NAP. They shouldn't have invaded. That doesn't mean Ukraine's innocent. They're a very much corrupt country, probably the second most corrupt behind Russia in that that whole area. But the thing about it is, like, Putin not only has nukes, but he has the most amount of nukes on the planet, and he has tons of little nukes, tactical nukes as they're called. And at any moment, I don't think Putin is bluffing at all. I mean, he says he's not bluffing. He's called the West satanic, or at least politicians satanic. I think he's very willing. I actually think he's very willing to use nukes. And the crazy thing about it is that, they've seen the trains that carry the nuclear weapons and whatnot on the move for the first time in a while. People in Poland are taking potassium iodide as well in Ukraine. They're making nuclear shelters. It's clear that not only are there fears of nukes from, like, not only is Russia, talking about nukes, but countries are acting as though they're going to drop a nuclear bomb. The question is, if Russia does drop a nuclear bomb, tactical nuke, whatever the damage and the proportion is, what will any other countries, NATO members, and any country surrounding that area, what are they going to do? That's my question for you, because it's like, if Ukraine is not a NATO country, right, there's no Article 5. Right. But in my opinion, I don't know if that would stop any European countries and or the U.S. from, making some sort of counterattack. I'm not saying it has to be a nuclear weapon, but I mean, who knows what the U.S. has hidden as far as technology, right? I don't know, but what do you think?
It's a really delicate question, and it depends on how Putin wields his nuclear force. If it's a small tactical nuke, now you have to remember, we're saying that they're small tactical nukes. The small tactical nukes that Russia has are still more powerful than what we dropped on Nagasaki.
Yeah, by a lot, by quite a bit.
Those low yield, is that another word?
Like kilotons, not megatons.
Right. So the largest small tactical nuke that Russia has is approximately 125 megatons, which is about 12 and a half times more powerful than what we dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Their smallest is about 40 megatons, which is about 4 times larger than what we hit Nagasaki and Hiroshima with. So it's very scary. People are trying to figure out, if he uses them, where is he going to use them? There's a lot of individuals in the military intelligence area that think that a smart move is, if he has to deploy it, that he'll probably use a demonstration first on Ukrainian territory, something like Snake Island. But that's not necessarily exactly what he's going to do, because Russians tell you what they're going to do. They take away the element of surprise, but when they hit, they usually hit hard. So I wouldn't be surprised if he would go after a major metropolitan area within the Ukraine personally.
Kiev is what I think he'll do.
I don't know if he would go straight for Kiev or Kyiv, but he'll go for something. Yeah. The one difficulty with going for Kyiv or Kiev is the fact that the prevailing winds will probably push most of the nuclear fallout towards Poland. And if the nuclear fallout enters into Polish territory, the Poles may take that as an act of aggression, and therefore they'll then respond to this Russian attack, and then they may mobilize.
Okay. Can I ask,
does Poland have any nuclear weapons? I know they're asking for some from the U.S. Do they already have any?
So we do have the United States has nuclear weapons within Polish borders.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
But they are not actually owned or operated by the Poles. However, there would be some sort of conventional warfare that they would issue forth. I would not be surprised by that action. And if Poland enters the war, Russia will retaliate and therefore all of a sudden trigger Article 5.
Okay.
Especially seeing that Poland is going to be claiming that the Russians attacked them with the nuclear fallout. So
this is scary, man.
I know it's honestly, I couldn't get any sleep thinking about this the other night, because one of the things that I thought of is, like, everyone's talking about Civil War, World War, right? I was thinking about what is one of the consistent, factors and key things we see in all these world wars leading up to them, right? Like, some people say an economic crisis, a financial crisis, and that's very much true in a lot of these circumstances. But one of the things that I saw, one of the main things that you see here, maybe even more than the economic crisis, I'm not sure, or maybe even, but before World War I, you already had the Napoleonic Wars, you had Germany, you had Prussia, you had a bunch of countries in Europe at war already. You essentially had a European war for a large portion of the 1800s, and then in the early 1900s, you obviously get World War I, and you saw, in leading up to World War I, you saw all these countries making allegiances and promises and alliances and deals to guard some and defend against others. And then World War I ends, they come up with something during the Paris peace meeting or whatever. I think the Paris peace meeting in 1920, they come up with something called the League of Nations. The idea was, make this League of Nations so we have multiple countries who will defend against another world war, so there will be peace. And not only did League of Nations not work, it actually pretty much led to the Second World War, because of a lot of the factors. And then League of Nations was basically disbarred and turned into the UN. But the point is, a lot of the World War II, yes, of course, there's the financial crisis leading up to that, but that global alliance and the idea that you can just start making certain alliances to countries around the world, and that you're going to do that without no consequences to other countries, and that you're going to start doing certain things like tariffs and sanctions, and that countries aren't going to do anything. It's what it is it's global bullying, and it's thinking that you can control warfare by dominating the entire world through peace. They always use that word peace, but it's not really peace, is it? We've seen NATO involved in violence in foreign countries. We've seen them kill people, NATO soldiers and UN soldiers as well. So it's like, I mean, how much of this is actually going to lead to peace versus, I mean, I don't know what it's going to look like, but devastation nonetheless.
Well, there's a lot of correlations to the years leading up to World War I and right now. In the 30 years prior to World War I, you had a huge revolution of naval technology and just military technology in general. And there were a lot of countries that were investing heavily in this new military technology, and they wanted to use it. You had the Moroccan affair between France and Germany. You had other many small little skirmishes around the world, and a lot of it also had to do with imperialism. To kind of look at what this correlates to today, you're seeing drone warfare. You have countries that are investing in drones like no other time in history. It's a brand new weapons technology. Nations around the world are developing drone forces. There's corporate imperialism going on right now. There's a dividing of Africa. China's rolling in hot and heavy and building infrastructure to
Belt and Road Initiative,
Africa.
right?
And we're doing the same thing in many areas, and other westernized nations are doing the same thing. So a lot of what happened prior to World War I is exactly what's going on right now. We've just changed some of the terminology. I would not be surprised that. Do I think that we're really going to see this devolve into a nuclear war this time? I don't think so. If you look at everything that's going on, as long as we can make it to Thanksgiving, I think that's going to be the telling aspect. Usually, if Russia starts threatening something, they'll actually do it in 30 to 60 days. So I think that's the time between now and Thanksgiving is when you should be biting your nails. If we can get past Thanksgiving, I think we're pretty safe.
Okay, yeah, because people were asking, like, there's nothing I can do. I'm like, well, let's wait and see before we jump the gun. But it is very, very just, nerve rattling. Because even in economic collapse, I can do stuff with Bitcoin. I can figure out generators, you can figure out community stuff. This is not something you just be like, okay, well, what do we do from here? I have a question myself, and I got a couple questions in the chat. KT Rainbow, I think that's Kevin.
Stop asking for that.
Yes, he could, but he probably wouldn't.
Yeah, he's going to go to an area in which NATO doesn't have to defend. That would be the smartest thing. It would be Ukraine. Then if a European country like Poland does, have some sort of retaliation, then it's all out warfare. But I don't think Putin would be motivated to drop any nuclear bombs on the United States. And the reason why I think that is because the United States is loaded with nuclear bombs, but not only nuclear bombs. We have a lot of different weapons, and there's some theories out there, some of them true, but there's basically been historically from the 40s, 50s, and 60s, there's been these times where, there was very close to a nuclear war, especially in the 60s, and these nuclear missiles were ready and armed, and then a UFO was seen by these nuclear weapons, and they would actually shut them off, and they would turn off the nuclear weapons. Now, I'm not saying that's aliens. It could be U.S. tech. Who knows what it is? But it's happened over and over and over again in different countries, U.S. and in the Soviet Union at the time. But also, we've seen a lot of these Pentagon papers coming out about these UFOs that are like defying the laws of physics and typical propulsion. And whether it's aliens, like out of world, whatever you want to call them, or it's some sort of tech, I think the probability of the tech being from the United States is almost 100% likely, considering every time you see these phenomenon, they're always above Navy bases. Every time they're around Navy bases where they're doing secret.
Well, who knows, man? I do believe in extraterrestrial life, though. That's another subject. But this is actually a good question. And I'll ask you a couple of questions I'm curious about. He was also asking what happened in April 2022 when Ukraine was going for peace talk with Russia.
That's a good point.
Boris Johnson got all dumb.
I'm going to see if I can pull up that story.
To my understanding, Zelensky was asking for a restoration to pre-invasion status. So basically basically saying, hey, this was a big mistake. We're just going to pull our forces back to where we were in January of this year, and we're just going to call it over. The Russians were not willing to do that. And basically the talks fell apart. To my knowledge, Boris Johnson was trying to facilitate the talks. But to my knowledge, and I don't know what happens behind closed doors, to my knowledge, Boris Johnson didn't talk Ukraine out of promising and made promises of millions of euros. Obviously, Boris Johnson's no longer there, and the Ukraine has not gotten their millions of euros. I mean, they've gotten millions, if not billions of dollars of military hardware, but they haven't gotten millions of dollars of financial aid.
Okay.
So,
yeah. I just shared the link for that article.
Yeah.
I don't know if they actually got money, because what I think it might have been is that Boris Johnson might have made some sort of promise. I don't know how much exactly, and then he obviously wasn't prime minister, so it might have worked out where they didn't get any money at all.
Let me ask a question out of left field. Let's say we make it to Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Are you familiar with Hotter Than the Sun?
No.
Okay, so basically, since you're familiar with Scott Horton, because I know you're
absolutely.
Conference. Scott Horton said it was time to abolish nuclear weapons, which I thought about. I'm like, do you think that? So say nothing happens here, but it's still scary. Like I don't think anyone's going to say, even if nothing popped, even if he was bluffing the whole time and nothing happens, the fact that just nuclear trains were on the move, I think is cause for concern, no matter where you're at in the world. And they have been used before. And let's face it, just the prospect of even it happening is scary. Do you think it's possible to get rid of nuclear, abolish them, as Scott Horton's suggesting in his book, or is that
realistically? I mean, that's like saying you're going to uninvent the gun.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's exactly what I would compare it to too.
It's not. It would be a wonderful idea. I would love to see it happen. Realistically, it's not going to. I think you can have. I think this entire ordeal will probably spur on a new generation of SALT treaties, where there will be discussions about massive disarmament, reapplying nuclear material, or at least agreeing not to build any new ones. I think that is very likely out of this. But as much as I think many people would love to see the destruction of every nuclear weapon out there,
including myself,
especially now with nations like Pakistan and India, and so nuclear proliferation is at a very high level right now, and you're just not going to get people to give them up.
Yeah, well, it's, and I get it's a two-sided thing, because I think part of the reason they won't go after North Korea or Iran is they're like, well, maybe they have one, so we don't want to risk it.
Right.
So I can understand on one side of the coin, people can say, okay, I want it for protection. But I would say maybe not in my lifetime, but if you keep pushing anarchist thought and things get more and more decentralized, and say, why do we need these things? Eventually, because we don't need nation states, we don't need global states, we're all living locally. I don't feel like maintaining a nuclear reactor this size. So I guess maybe in the future. Ian on Tim Pool suggested this. Now, the U.S. government is, everything they've done with COVID is pretty evil. Let's just be honest. They don't value human life, at least from my perspective. As much as they come out and say they want to protect you, seems like a lot of them really have other initiatives for climate change and bringing down everything. Do you think, not Putin, but the U.S. government, because they've tested it in Northwoods and stuff, do you think they might take out, just if things get bad? You think the U.S. government might destroy a small town or city?
False flag? That's what I was thinking.
Oh, Russia did it. Russia, because, and false flags aren't out of the thing, because we're already at war with Russia. So what's to stop?
I mean, we might have just blew up their pipeline, or I should say U.S./NATO might have just blown up their pipeline and blamed it on them. Because if I'm looking at this, I've looked at it over and over and over again and listened to multiple commentaries on it. I don't see a valid reason why they would destroy their own pipeline when they control over 55% of it, and they can simply turn it off. And it wasn't active and hadn't been active for months.
Biden said they do it.
And they in the West,
and Newland.
Yes, and Newland and Biden said they would end it. So it's like, I mean, that looks like a U.S./NATO operation.
So to be totally honest, I think that is a tactic that will be much more used by Russia. I would not be surprised if Russia detonates a nuke on Russian territory and actually tries blaming the West for it.
You're right.
You know, Putin. There's a very strong argument for the fact that Putin came to power when shortly after the Chechen rebels bombed Moscow. And there is a strong case for the fact that that was actually never done by Chechen rebels and may have actually been done by Putin's people.
And there's people that like theorize that or have some evidence for it.
There's enough circumstantial evidence to make a strong case for it, but there isn't enough that would hold up in court.
Well, wasn't Putin an ex-KGB agent? Like he knows all these. Listen, Putin is a lot of things, but he's not dumb, and he's not impulsive. That's what's crazy about the move to invade. Mm-hmm. Maybe he's getting older, and maybe he is losing, he's degrading neurodegeneratively. Maybe that's the case. Maybe he just made an impulsive move. Maybe he overestimated the capabilities of the Russian army and underestimated the Ukrainian army. That's very much possible. But he doesn't make moves that aren't measured and done with thorough planning before he makes them. He's very calculated in his decision making, and every time, the best interviews that I would suggest anyone watch is the Oliver Stone Putin interviews, because he's talked to him more than anyone else on the planet, especially in the West. And, you know, he's very calculated. He knows what he's doing. He's not stupid. He's not impulsive. And everyone around him says the same thing. And everyone who's ever met him said it. You know, he's a cool, calm, and collected guy. So the question is, what is Putin planning? What are his plans? What does he really want? Does he really want nuclear war, or is he striving for some other end, some other goal? I think it might be something approximating this. He does not like the United States. And by that, I don't mean the United States people, right? If you look at RT, ton of Western journalists on there that I personally like. You can say what you want about it. I think RT's not bad. They've had both sides on and whatnot, but he hates the United States government. Yeah. And a lot of this current, in my opinion, sadistic, masochistic culture that's in America right now that is very much imperial, that is very much authoritarian. And when you look at foreign policy from the Kissinger Group, when you look at the rise of the petrodollar and United States foreign interventionism, right, those are things that he's all right on. Like, he's all correct when he says all those things. So I don't know if he would nuke the U.S. because he doesn't hate the U.S. people. He just hates the government. So there might be something else that he has planned, like nuclear war, and dropping a nuclear bomb might not be his end goal. I don't know what it is. I'm trying to think.
I don't think it is either. I think, first of all, he isolated himself entirely during the
COVID pandemic.
The COVID thing.
Yeah, that's a good point.
He
scary.
Almost actually turned himself into a situation that Hitler had, where he only had yes people around him. And Hitler made the same exact mistakes when he attacked Russia. And that's was because he only had people telling him what he wanted to hear. And that's exactly what Putin has surrounded himself by. And that's the exact same problem Putin is falling him into right now, is that he has isolated himself and disconnected himself from the military. Prior to COVID, Putin was famous for touring military bases on a very regular basis, had in-depth conversations with people up and down the military chain, especially lower officers. And he hasn't done that in over 2 years. Wow. And I think that has really impacted his ability to understand what the status of the Russian military was. So I think there was a lot of bad information that Putin had. Thankfully, because I think he's still a psychopath. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely also right that he's not a dumb individual. Putin is a very smart individual, and he's very dangerous. But I don't think nuclear war is his ultimate goal.
Yeah.
I think the reason that nuclear is on the table is because he's being backed into a corner. He's afraid. I mean, China and India are kind of cooling their relations with him. China's pulling a very far back.
That's interesting that they've done that, where they started to look as though they were going to be on the side of Russia, and then they sort of scaled back and were like, we're just going to stay out of this and watch this. And that's what China's been doing for the last, I don't know, 50 plus years, is that, they're like, we don't want to get in any wars. We want to just build our economy. We want to start.
I think China was actually using this as a test case to see what the West was going to do.
That's a good point.
Because they wanted to see what the reaction from the West was, and can they actually put a serious move on Taiwan. And I think that has been thoroughly kiboshed because that, first of all, the West did not get entangled like China was probably hoping, that they could kind of go backdoor Taiwan and the West would be concerned with Ukraine.
We have Quad. We have Quad, which is another. People don't know what that is, but I've looked that up. So that's like Australia. Like, I don't know how well the Australian military is equipped, but I think it'd be Australia.
They got massive kangaroos.
Australia, America, India, and Japan. Australia. Am I wrong? Is that Quad?
Australia.
No, America, Britain, Japan, and Australia.
Yeah.
So.
The only thing, the Australians, they're very nice guys. Never challenge them to a drinking contest. But especially their military, they are alcoholics through and through. But as far as military preparedness, Australia is not at the big boys table. But they're it's a good fighting force. It's not one that I would trifle with, but at the same time, it's not China, it's not the United States, it's not Russia. I think going back to the original point, Putin is being backed into a corner. China and India are cooling on him. Let's be honest, the actions in the Ukraine in the last 2 weeks have not gone well for Russia. They're being pushed back. Actually, there are parts of the Ukrainian border that are pre-2014 and pre-invasion of the Crimea. There's a lot of interesting things. Russia is not doing well. And if Putin has any hope of having a positive stance still in the Russian government, enough that he can install a puppet of his own choosing, the war needs to escalate.
And I have this sort of. Go ahead, Kareem.
No, I was going to ask about a different individual if you know him, because I'm assuming since you're in NATO, did some intelligence. I was commenting on Greg Reese's video because he said, like, here's the good side of Putin. And I said, well, here's the bad side, and here's kind of the middle. Like, is he right about our Western leaders being, well, they're not satanic, they're dark Luciferians, and they're controlled by external entities. And I have no doubt that that's true. I know I'm going a little further, but what I will say, and he's right about the West doing a lot of bad things. But what I will say is I think he's influenced by a guy named Alexander Dugin, if you're familiar with that name. And basically, the guy said that what his goal is to kind of create a Russian-style, not communist, but sort of collectivist society with traditional values and antithetical to the West, and then ally that with the Orthodox Church. And my thinking is that he started to see Ukraine becoming kind of a Western satellite and said, no, I kind of want them to go in the direction I want them to go to, which I'm going to say this. There's good aspects to traditional life that we can appreciate. And then there's good ideas to some or different other aspects. We can see the extremes of both. We can see the extremes now of neoliberalism. We can see the extremes of traditional stuff in the Middle East. But is he mainly influenced by Alexander Dugin? Is that his goal? Kind of what I stated here is to push them into that direction, not to create the USSR,
No.
Since they're socially
I
homogenous.
mean, they did call him the Alex Jones of Russia, so yeah, that's what they called him. That was a funny thing. And his daughter was just fucking killed in a bomb. Like, I don't know if you guys heard about that, but yeah, that's crazy because you gotta wonder who did that. And I think we know who did that.
Oh yeah. I mean, if you look at what is it? I forget the number right now, but a lot of the financial leaders and Russian mafia bosses are jumping out of hospital windows or dying in car accidents right now. So, or in this case, dying because some mysterious bomb blew up her car. Russia is not a good place right now. But as far as he trying to create an orthodox state, I mean, it's entirely possible. I think it's backfiring on him because if anything, it's driving the Ukraine further to the west than anything else. And the Ukraine is looking at the West right now and saying, aha, these are the people who are actually our allies. It's, I'm sorry.
Because I've read like the people who are like high level NATO and like the WEF people that say like, oh, we used Ukraine as our satellite so we could, because there are people like Crenshaw are very, very open, the neoconservative, the young global leaders who say like, we just want Russia to, they also want to keep this going, in my opinion, so Russia can expand all of its troops and military stuff. Because I think some of them are mad because he helped Assad in Syria, which I agree with that part. But he helped Assad in Syria stay, so that kind of pushed their plans, in my opinion, a little bit back. So I do think there's also the evil element of the West saying, "Oh, we want to prolong, we want to destabilize them, and we want to get the military-industrial complex more money." And
I mean, from a Western aspect, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, and Hunter Biden's deal. So to me, it's like, ooh, Ukraine's kind of like something we can use. They don't care about the people there, but they like their business deals, their money laundering, their checks to the military industrial.
When has government ever cared about the people? I mean, come on.
Yeah, I mean,
I have a theory about where this might end, and it's a dark theory, but I think it might be it's looking more and more probable. Okay, so one thing we know about the Russians, whether the Russians are majority in alignment with Putin's views and what he's doing with the invasion in Ukraine, Russians usually don't like to lose, and they usually don't lose, just historically speaking, right? Russia is a tough people with a very long, brutal history. And one of the things I was thinking about is in World War II, you brought it up earlier, but, Hitler and a lot of his cohorts that were with him, thought about invading Russia. Then they did it mistakenly, but really what their mistake was they basically told Hitler, his generals were like, we need to go in this way, but Hitler decided to go through Stalingrad simply because of the name, because he wanted to do it as a pride move to disparage Stalin because of the nature of the name, and that was a less strategic route and ended up pretty much costing them the war. But that war was largely won by Russia because they're tough, right? But also because the winter in Russia, and we're approaching the winter in Russia. And I know Ukraine's probably pretty bad too, but I mean, something's either going to happen before winter or in winter. It's really good. I think winter will really be the end, whether it's nukes, whatever it is, because it gets so cold there. Tons and tons of people will die in this war if they continue or escalate like this in the winter. They will freeze to death, and tons of people
in Europe, though. Because keep in mind, one thing that I think is also scary from this, aside from the warfare it stops today, is that for whatever reason, virtue signaling, Greta Thunberg, or just crazy environmental,
How dare you?
Yeah, how dare you? Yes, I'll go mine lithium so we can destroy a mountain and then complain someone's mining Bitcoin.
She was like, "Save." Do you see what she said recently? She said, "Save the banks." We need to save the banks.
Oh, I missed that one.
Yeah, okay. I should pull that up. That was hilarious.
Well, being honest,
dude, I wonder, like, if Klaus Schwab is like, "Save this little girl."
Yeah.
Like, I wonder who's in her ears, because if she's really doing that on her own, there's seriously a problem.
She's not doing that stuff on her own. They're because she can't answer questions. She's like, oh, so someone's essentially programming her. But I guess my concern is by winter, since Europe tried to go green, which I don't care for going green unless you're using Tesla technology. There's going to be a whole lot of people now that the Nord Stream pipeline's on that they don't have any ways to heat their homes. So Germany, all these countries, in my opinion, in the winter are going to freeze. Now,
yeah,
I think that is deliberately being done by globalist institutions like the World Economic Forum that want to create a climate crisis under the guise of depopulation initiatives. And hopefully I don't sound too crazy here, but I listen to what they write and they say. And they do say climate crisis, get rid of all your fossil fuels. Okay, I'm not saying fossil fuels are perfect or nuclear energy is perfect, but what are you going to do now during winter? And that's a scary thing I'm worried about, is not just people in the war freezing, but people all over the continent freezing. So, yeah.
A large part, I mean, there is still going to be a fuel shortage in a lot of Europe, but a lot of what was supposed to be coming over the Nord Stream pipeline is actually going to be replaced with the Saudi tanker fleet, because the Saudis have already basically assured Europe that they're going to keep oil running to Europe in tankers. A large part of this, I think, and if I had to make a guess, it's probably for Europe to look the other way, especially with all the actions going on in Yemen or in other parts of the peninsula. But I don't know why, but there's some shenanigan going on. But yeah, no, a lot of that's going to be happening.
So you don't think people freeze, Saudi Arabia will jump in and do something?
Well, did you
so
guys
far,
see
that's the promise from Saudi Arabia. Now we haven't got the weather yet. Winter.
That OPEC cut off the oil. That's crazy that they. But the thing is like,
do you trust someone like? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
In my opinion, you know who the worst leader is? It's not Joe Biden. Joe Biden doesn't know where he's at. It's not even Trudeau. I mean, they're horrible. But I'd say the worst leader based on what he's done is MBS. I wouldn't trust that guy.
You wouldn't fist bump him, Kareem? You wouldn't give him a fist bump?
No, I would rather take the procedure that the Dark Luciferian that guy, because I know what I'd say. I'd be like, well, you're a piece of crap. You're destroying Yemen. You don't know the Quran. You're a scumbag. And I would even go as far as this. If the intelligence agency is like, we're going to do a little thing, I'm like, in Saudi Arabia, I'm like, I don't like you, but like, okay, fine. Like, I hate that.
If Europe turns a blind eye to what's going on in Yemen, and other actions that probably Saudi Arabia is getting ready to do, he'll supply Europe with oil. Because it's going to be in his own best interest.
Yeah, he'll make money off it. He can sell the oil at a premium. Like he just cut production by 2 million barrels a day. Yeah. So that the thing is, though, my thing is like, should we even be getting oil from them anyways? Why are we reliant upon OPEC and MBS? Why don't we have tons of oil and resources here. Why is it that we've decided that it's better for us economically or environmentally that we outsource our energy and our oil and our petrol to other countries and be at the behest of those countries rather than just, have our oil here? It's not like we don't have that. We have tons of oil, tons and tons of more to mine and use. I just wonder why that is. Why is it that we want to use OPEC and all these countries instead of doing it ourselves?
Partially it's actually global trade. It saves Japan money for buying oil from the United States instead of shipping it from Saudi Arabia. It decreases Japanese oil by whatever factor. But then we have to offset that, so we have to buy from either from the Middle East or usually from South America.
Interesting.
And so it's kind of this shifting of supplies. The United States produces 98% of what it consumes. So literally, if we had to, we would only have to import less than 2% of our annual oil supply. Now, there was a couple of years where we were over 100%, but we've fallen back down to 98%, the last I saw.
Okay.
So we only have to import very little. But again, oil is set by a national or by an international oil market, the International Commodities Exchange market. So by selling oil to Japan and they get to save money, that reduces the cost of oil globally. Therefore, it keeps our prices at the pump lower. But we then have to use foreign oil and not just domestic oil. Okay. So the only time that we would really see a dramatic drop in oil prices is if we withdrew ourselves from the international commodities market and then relied only on domestic oil, which is entirely possible.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, would that be better than, or is it better to, the other way, right? The trade way.
So as long as the United States has enough oil to supply the demand in the United States, it's fine. Mm-hmm. But let's say all of a sudden we find out we only have 20-year supply or a 40-year supply in the United States, whatever number that might be. Once we hit that wall, then we have to get back into the global commodities exchange, and seeing that and getting back in can be expensive. The other aspect is the World Bank uses the United States dollar as its exchange currency.
For now.
If we start removing ourselves from commodity exchanges, the World Bank may not see the United States dollar as the most viable currency anymore.
So we're sort of trapped in it in that way.
Exactly.
Well, okay, but I guess
that makes sense
from a consequentialist perspective, because that's how I've started to approach my views on anarchy and libertarianism. Let me throw some curveballs at you. What happens because I do feel like 31 trillion now, and they don't seem any sign of stopping. And I guarantee the Republicans they like to spend too. Next president's going to spend.
Oh, yeah.
There might not be another president.
There might not. But honestly, I can tell, I am 100% sure whoever it is going to be printing money. Unless it's Dave Smith. But they're going to print. So what happens now in the event? Because is hyperinflation? I would say hyperinflation is better than nuclear, but does that stop a lot?
Well, Eric just mentioned something regarding that. He's basically saying as long as we stay in this sort of oil exchange market, and that the World Bank continues to use the U.S. dollars, the exchange currency, we can have bad inflation, but it may never reach a hyperinflation level because of that, because we have the world's reserve currency.
And I mean, like gravity. You can have, I would say that's like, I don't know. To me, it's like an economic analogy of like strong wind resistance. Like, yeah, you can have strong wind resistance and maybe something's falling, but eventually the laws of economics are going to be like, look.
So, well, you're talking about something physical.
Yes.
The currency of the world currently is no more powerful than imagination.
Okay.
And as long as the people with the imagination, or the people that are controlling the imagination, think that your currency is worth something, it will be. Because it's not backed by anything other than the promise that the American population will produce. And that's basically what the Federal Reserve Note is. It's a promise that the American people will go to work tomorrow. And that's basically all it is.
But there is, the issue with that I have is there's a certain limit to that where you're going to walk into, I don't know if there'll be a crash, but you'll walk into Walmart one day and be like, watermelons are $50.
Yes.
We can't do this anymore. And then Walmart being a retailer, and other retailers will say, look, the dollar's not working. Let's all go to Bitcoin. Then does something happen?
The secret number is basically, as long as the United States is the global exchange currency, we could, in essence, borrow as a nation what the globe produces on an annual basis. So somewhere in the vicinity of about $94 trillion.
94 trillion?
Yeah, technically.
Yeah, technically. So that's where the magic number lies right now for the United States.
So
if you look at nations like Ireland or Greece or whatever, once they hit 90% of their own gross domestic product, that's where the level of trouble occurs for them.
Yeah.
If we were no longer the global reserve economy or currency, we would be beholden to those rules and regulations, and we would already be well past the level of Schitt's Creek.
Interesting. Well, because I saw the inflation in Turkey, and I'm like, this is gonna catch up here. They're like, oh no, it can't happen here. I'm like, it can, it can. I mean, Danny's been showing me like stock trades, and like even people made the joke after Darth Brandon's speech, like, look how far these stocks have gone. I don't trade stocks. I'm a crypto guy.
Yeah.
But I can recognize like, hey, if all these big investors are like, hey, things are going downhill, and I don't read charts all day, when they have no reason, in my opinion, to. There are even people who, like Kramer, who I'm like, these guys are usually.
Dude, when you look at his winning rate, it's hilarious. This guy is an MSNBC puppet, and 30% of his calls and predictions are correct. He's almost always wrong, this guy, Kramer. Like, it's just funny how they have these guys up on television giving people predictions when they're almost always incorrect. But one of the things that I do is I look at a lot of the big investors and some of the investors who played major roles in the 2008 crisis. So I look at guys like Michael Burry, of course, Elon Musk and his cohorts. I look at guys, ex-founder of PayPal, Peter Thiel. I look at a lot of those guys and see what they're trading. I look at their portfolios. And Michael Burry, this was a couple months ago before the Biden, red Star Wars speech, whatever you want to call it. A couple months before that, Michael Burry sold all of his shares, his entire portfolio, except for one stock. He left one stock in it. And I still to this day find it very weird and peculiar. The one stock he left in there was Geo. Geo is a company that works in the sector of building private prisons. That's the only company he left in there. That's scary and weird. And this is Michael Burry, the guy who predicted 08, the guy who predicted 2020, the guy who's predicting this next housing crisis / economic crisis. So when I looked at that, I sold a lot. I sold a lot of stuff. And I'm like, I'm just trying to think. This guy, obviously, he knows other stuff that we don't. He's involved in Wall Street. He has a lot of the same friends as Elon Musk and people in that echelon. And it's like, why was the only stock that he kept a company that works in building private prisons around the United States at the very least? I just find that peculiar. But all these other investors, such as Peter Thiel, all these other guys who, have been a part of VC for a very long time, investing in like companies or Facebook, they're pretty much putting a lot of their money in crypto, right? In crypto and in intelligence-based software. Like Palantir is a big company. It's, one of its founding members is Peter Thiel, and Alex Karp is the main CEO of the company. And again, that's a company that works with all these military branches, CIA. I think it works mainly with the Army and Navy, but it does that globally. So it works with all these militaries around the world. I think including some, I don't know about Russia, but areas near Russia works with some of their militaries. And it's essentially a data collections company that take a big company or military that needs to put a large amount of data. Like say you have a AI camera and it's zoning and you don't know what to do with all that data. You give it to Palantir and they'll basically extrapolate that data and give you something you can actually look at. And a lot of these people are investing in these data AI Bitcoin companies. That's the majority of all the companies these people are investing in. And I'm like, I wonder why that is, because most people have pulled out. A lot of people have pulled out of real estate. A lot of people have pulled out of the banking sector of the market right now, as did Michael Berry. Sold, I mean, millions and millions of dollars in his stocks that were, in the financial sector. Most people are betting big on cryptocurrency, AI, and like that data integration software. Those are the three main things right now. And I just find that interesting.
Yeah, I found it interesting too. I'm betting on gold, food, and crypto. Well,
Well,
my thing is,
the funny thing is, I've actually sold off most of my stock portfolio, and I've moved it over to commodities, predominantly wheat, corn, and oil. So yeah, we'll see how what my guess is.
yeah, we'll have to see.
You might be correct in doing that. I still have some stocks, but I sold a lot of those ones that. I mean, I was lucky that I got that. When I saw that, it was, I got to dump these. And then 3 months later, maybe 2 months later, Biden has that speech and the market just boom goes so down. It was the first time that it went to 30,000 since Biden. It basically went lower than it did when Biden first took office. And that's hard to do, by the way. That's like difficult to do.
Hey man, Joe Biden's doing a good job then. He's
he's going against Wall Street. He's fighting Wall Street.
Corn Pop was a bad dude. But yeah, I'm mining Tether and staking Ether. That's what I'm doing, even though I don't like Ethereum, whatever. But I guess from my perspective, I also read an article, and I pull up, this could be one of the last things, that some of the Houthis were saying that because there was an issue, they had a ceasefire, it was going good, and then they're trying to broker it, then they had problems with that some companies might still leave Saudi Arabia and the UAE. I'm not, and what's funny is Saudi Arabia seems to be, I guess, inept at warfare. Like to me, and this can be your perspective, because you're in the middle. You can give someone billions of dollars of weapons, like it did the Taliban, but if they don't know how to use it, or they don't have experience in conventional warfare, it doesn't matter. It's like giving a teenager a Ferrari, like drive this, and it's going to kill. To me, the Houthis can still hit their oil fields, and they've done that. And what's to stop them from continually hitting that? And I know why. They're tired of being starved to death, so I get that. Is that possible that keeps happening, and that even causes issues for MBS because he doesn't want to do the ceasefire?
The Middle East is going to be in conflict for generations. It's not something that's going to be resolved anytime soon. After World War I, the British drew all the lines. They had no respect and no guidance on how to draw those lines, and they just created a mess, intentionally or unintentionally. The debate, still exists on that one. Yeah, it's the Middle East is going to be fighting for a very, very long time for a multitude of reasons.
Yeah. I would say, here's what I would say. I would think if we have less American involvement and people have to work things out, sometimes it gets better. The one thing that I like, and this is not necessarily something he did, but okay, NBA, people from Saudi Arabia are talking to people from Syria now because Joe Biden's dumb. I'm like, that's good. I don't want us to be involved. We don't need to be involved. There might be still conflict, but if there is, we don't need to be involved. We can't even figure out. Washington can't even balance their own budget. Crime. We still have crime around their area. What makes them think, even if they want to? I'm saying even if 100% they sat there and how can we solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the Yemen conflict? How can we solve all the issue in Libya? That they couldn't, even if they were doing it altruistically, because they just don't have the knowledge to do so or the experience. So, yeah, but with everything here, let's say fingers crossed, hopefully, that, things do work out. I have a funny feeling they will. A funny feeling we'll make it to Thanksgiving. I have a good feeling, maybe the ceasefire in Yemen will eventually, keep going. And I have a good feeling. I do have an optimistic feeling. And I think that's because people put pressure on governments like we do. But I still think it's a good idea to work towards ordered anarchy to prevent this from happening ever again. I don't know if that's your point of view or what's kind of the best way which I think when we make it out of this to kind of not, if we're not going to get rid of nukes, can we get rid of most central governments?
Hey, Kareem, I'm going to head out. Thank you so much for having me on. It was great talking with you, Eric.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Right.
My pleasure.
Take it easy, guys.
Take it easy. And I'll throw
and yeah, I mean, I don't think we're going to see anarchy in my lifetime. Actually, this goes back to a conversation, just a casual conversation Michael Heiss and I had a couple of months ago.
Nice.
But I would love to see anarchy, but I don't see it happening in my lifetime, and probably not even the lifetime of my children, if I had any. That's why, I mean, I have no problem fighting for minarchy, because I think that's a more attainable goal in my lifetime. But I definitely appreciate every single anarchist out there, because it keeps my feet to the fire.
Yeah.
And making sure that, I don't lose sight and don't become mired down in compromise.
Okay.
But yeah, no, I mean, I would love to see anarchy, but at the same time, I don't think it'll happen in my lifetime.
Well, we'll have to see. Like you're saying, you don't know. But here's the one thing I'll say is I don't know if it will in mine either.
Mm-hmm.
But and I think minarchism is a great step to get to for now.
Yeah.
I will say one thing I uniquely saw, and Dave Smith kind of brought out, is most dictators kind of started off as minarchists. Almost everyone just said, I just want the government to do this. I was actually looking at a guy named Idi Amin from Uganda. And he's like, I just want to help Ugandans out. I just want to do that. That's all I want to do.
Yeah.
And yeah, they're poor, that's not.
Well, okay. So yeah, I'll concede the fact that a lot of dictators talk the rhetoric of minarchists.
They do.
However, I don't think one of them has any goal of ever achieving minarchism. And they are just power hungry hippos, out there to scavenge the entire board and end up with all the marbles. I think minarchism, a lot of people can understand it. A lot of people can get behind it. Okay. And when you have a displaced population, when you have a suffering population that sees that the government isn't doing anything, but they keep taking away all the money, it's a great selling point for a dictator to say, hey, I'm only going to do this one thing.
Yeah, that's
and the people will follow because they believe it. Yeah. But I don't think any of them ever had a real intention of minarchy from the get-go.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think they did either. I'm just saying, I'm not saying they're actual minarchists in the sense that they're reading like, oh, okay, well, I read Madison's Paradox and that's what I think. But a lot of the rhetoric and a lot of what people get in their minds are, oh, this guy's going to do, even Bernie Sanders is just, just free healthcare and for
because minarchism sells.
Yeah,
I mean, people are unsure of what a situation without government would be, so they still have that comfort net of government, and that they understand that, but they know that government needs to be smaller and it needs to be less influential in their lives because they know they can make better decisions about their life than the government can. So if someone comes around promising a smaller government, the majority of humans, not just Americans, but around the world, most people can understand that, most people can get behind it, and most people will support it, especially if they're suffering for something.
And that's what even I'm doing, and that's what a lot of people are doing. I'm saying smaller government, but I am saying, look, I'm going to get it to small, and there's going to be a point where and that's the issue I've seen is Like I was reading Idi Amin's quote. He's like, I just want to do these things in Uganda and get back, and I'll relinquish power and like bring it back to a democratic thing. And whether or not he honestly I'm pretty sure he didn't believe that, but he got people to believe that and just say, oh yeah, he's just going to do one or two. Stalin's just going to do a couple of things, man. Pol Pot just going to do something here or there. So that's the hard part with minarchy is 99%, aside from the founding fathers, and maybe some of the early British Parliament, and maybe some of the Australians, if they have that say, and I'll even give the Canadians like 3 or 4.
Sure.
But there's 200 countries in the world, so
there are examples of what things started out heading in the right direction, but then you get bad actors, or you get an emergency situation, and things get taken away, and new goals get put into place that drastically alter the direction of things. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people that are very scared at certain things, and they're willing to give up their freedom. And it's kind of a misquote, but it's kind of a not misquote. But Benjamin Franklin said that, if you are willing to sacrifice your liberty, you deserve neither, or if you are willing to sacrifice your liberty for security, you deserve neither security or liberty. And it's a little bit of a misquote, but at the same time, it's very accurate.
Yeah. Those who would give up.
Those
who would give up liberty for temporary security will not receive both. So we'll lose both. And that's what I've seen. So I don't exactly know what the answer is. I still am an advocate of studying Somalia post 1991 to where they were at. I even argue that, and this could be a conversation for another podcast, if the international community, the UN, and these same actors didn't get involved, then they would have still been in a state of order and anarchy, and Somalia would be in a much better position.
Well, the Italian government even today is trying to undermine what is going on in Somalia, especially with their devastation and dumping of garbage off the Somali coast. And this is to devastate the Somali fishermen and destroy a lot of the export capability of Somalia to actually reestablish themselves as a nation. This goes back to
stops that.
Yeah, this goes all the way back to the Italians having portions of Somalia as a colony. And the Italians, I think, are still pissed off that Somalia got independence. So there's a lot of long history and a lot of crap that unfortunately Somalia has to deal with. Yeah. But hopefully they're headed in the right direction now.
Yeah. Do you think the new prime minister in Italy would stop that or no? Probably.
We'll be lucky if she can get the trains to run on time. How about that?
Fair enough. Well, I guess then maybe we'll switch to that scary A word if nationalism isn't working. Like I'll be like, hey.
Oh yeah. There you go. There you go.
All right. Well, Erik, I really, really appreciate all your expertise.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
And we'll have to see what happens. Fingers crossed. I don't think anything bad is going to happen. But as an insurance policy, hey, let's try and get to minarchy. And then if we can get there, take the goalpost and let's move. Let's see if we can move to that word that starts with an A that some people like and some people are scared of.
If there's a global catastrophe such as a global nuclear war, I think anarchy is the only solution. So definitely.
And I would agree. I would also agree if there isn't, anarchy is the only solution.
Well, okay. If there's a global catastrophe such as a global nuclear war, I think that is probably, in my opinion, the only way that we're going to see anarchy in my lifetime, because that would hyper localize everything.
Okay. Well, Erik, I appreciate your time. I appreciate all of your expertise in answering all these questions. You definitely have more knowledge than me on like NATO, the Pentagon, and stuff like that, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Ladies and gentlemen, we have Erik Raudsep. He's done a lot for the Libertarian Party. Specifically, he got really great praise from the current chair, Angela McArdle. He has a really, really extensive background in understanding different military and foreign affairs. So we appreciate everything you brought to this podcast, and definitely come back soon. I'm your host, Kareem Mays, with the Essential Libertarians, bringing you the tools for self-governance. Thanks for watching. Catch you in the next video.